Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. The little girl didn't cry. That was the part that broke him. She just lowered her eyes, slowly, quietly, the way children do when they've already learned that wanting something too much only leads to disappointment. Her small fingers, which had been pressed hopefully against the glass of the cake display just seconds before, slipped away without a sound. No tears, no protest, just acceptance. And somehow, that silence was louder than anything Jack Thompson had heard in 22 years of war. He hadn't meant to be watching. He never did. He came to Rosetti's bakery every Thursday at exactly 2 in the afternoon, sat in the same corner booth, ordered the same small black coffee, and kept his eyes to himself. That was the arrangement he had made with the world after he came home. You leave me alone, I leave you alone. It had worked well enough for 3 years. But Rex had looked up first, and wherever Rex looked, Jack eventually followed. Jack Thompson was 50 years old, though some mornings he felt closer to 70. 2 decades in the United States Army had left him with a stiff right knee that ached in cold weather, a lower back that protested stairs, and a kind of deep, settled quietness that people sometimes mistook for peace. It wasn't peace. It was the silence of a man who had learned to carry things alone for so long that he'd forgotten there was any other way. He wore his old army cap every day, not out of pride, though he had earned the right to pride, but because it was familiar. Familiar things mattered when the rest of the world felt tilted. His flannel shirt was clean but worn. His boots were the same pair he'd had for 6 years. He wasn't a man who replaced things before they were finished. At his feet, taking up considerably more floor space than the bakery probably preferred, lay Rex. Rex was a German shepherd, 9 years old now, with a broad chest, a muzzle that had gone silver around the edges, and eyes that were amber and ancient and impossibly calm. He had served 2 tours with Jack in Afghanistan, a military working dog, trained for detection, trained for protection, trained to run toward danger without hesitation. He had saved Jack's life once in a way that Jack never spoke about, but also never forgot. Now, Rex moved a little slower. His joints were stiffer in the mornings. He slept longer than he used to. But those eyes, those steady, watchful amber eyes had lost nothing. He still saw everything. He still felt everything. And on this particular Thursday, at 2:17 in the afternoon, Rex felt something that made him lift his head from his paws, raise his ears, and turn his gaze across the bakery toward the door. The bell above the entrance had rung gently, the kind of soft sound that barely registered on a normal afternoon. But nothing about the woman who stepped through the door was ordinary, even if everything about her appearance was designed to seem so. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back simply, and a coat that had been washed so many times the color had faded from navy to something closer to gray. She held the hand of a small girl, 7 years old maybe, whose shoes were thinning at the soles, and whose hair was tied with a pink ribbon that had begun to fray at the edges. The little girl's eyes went immediately to the cake display, the way all children's eyes do. Wide, hopeful, lit from the inside with that particular joy that only exists before the world has had its way with you. The woman, her name was Elena, though Jack didn't know that yet, guided her daughter gently toward the counter. She glanced once around the bakery, the way people do when they're hoping no one is paying attention to them. Then she leaned slightly toward the young cashier and spoke in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Do you have anything expired? Just something small." She paused. "Today is her birthday." The cashier blinked. A couple nearby shifted in their seats. One man near the window folded his newspaper with a sigh that said everything about what he thought of the interruption. "We don't give away food, ma'am," the cashier said, not unkindly, just flatly, the way policies are delivered. Elena nodded once, quickly, like she'd expected it, and straightened. "That's all right," she said softly. "Thank you." She turned to her daughter and began to say something gentle, something that would redirect the little girl's attention, something mothers say when they are trying to hold the world together with bare hands. But the little girl had already heard, and she did not cry. She simply looked at the cakes one more moment, at the vanilla one with pink roses along the edges, and then she looked away. That was the moment. That silent, dignified, heartbreaking acceptance. Rex was already on his feet. Jack hadn't planned to move. He never planned anything anymore. Planning felt like tempting the universe. But his body was standing before his mind had finished the argument. His knee protested as he rose from the booth. He ignored it. He'd been ignoring that knee for 11 years. Rex walked ahead of him, not rushing, not pulling, just moving with that quiet certainty that had always made Jack trust him more than most people. The dog approached the little girl slowly, head slightly lowered, tail still. Not intimidating, just present. Just saying in the language that dogs have always spoken better than humans, "I see you. You're not invisible to me." The little girl looked at Rex with wide eyes. Rex looked back at her with those amber eyes that had seen firefights and grief and the worst of what the world could offer, and somehow remained gentle. Jack crouched down carefully in front of her, his knees screaming quietly in protest. He was at her eye level now, a big man made small on purpose. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. She looked at her mother first, checking, the way children do when they've been taught to be cautious. Elena gave the smallest nod. "Sophia," the little girl said. "Sophia." Jack said it like it deserved to be said carefully. "That's a beautiful name. How old are you today, Sophia?" "7." "7." He nodded as if 7 were a significant and serious accomplishment, which he had decided in that moment it absolutely was. Well, 7-year-olds have opinions about cake. Which one would you pick if you could pick any one? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she pointed to the vanilla cake with the pink roses. "But just a small piece is okay. I don't need the whole thing." Jack looked at her for a moment. Then he stood, turned to the cashier, and asked, "How much for the whole cake?" $42, sir." He reached into his wallet, placed $200 on the counter. "I'll take it. 7 candles on top, and box up some sandwiches and a container of that soup, whatever's warmest." Elena stepped forward immediately. "Sir, please, we don't want charity." Jack turned to her. He looked at her the way soldiers look at each other when words aren't quite enough, directly, steadily, without performance. "It's not charity," he said quietly. "It's a birthday." And then Rex, as if he had understood every word, walked over to Sophia and sat beside her. Gently, with the deliberate care of an animal that knows its own size and strength, he lowered his great silver-muzzled head and rested it against her arm. Sophia laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and reached up to touch his ears. The bakery had gone quiet in that particular way that happens when something true occurs in a public place. They lit the candles at the corner table. Jack stood slightly to the side, holding his coffee cup, unsure of his place in the moment. He was not a man accustomed to belonging to things. Belonging required a kind of softness he had spent years protecting himself from. "Make a wish," Elena told her daughter gently. Sophia closed her eyes, squeezed them tight. The candles flickered. Then she opened her eyes, looked directly at Jack, and said with the complete and total sincerity that only children possess, "I wished that you and your dog never have to go back to war." The room went absolutely still. Jack Thompson, a man who had walked through firefights, who had carried wounded brothers across open ground, who had stood at 3 military funerals and never allowed himself to break, felt something move through his chest that he had no name for. He reached down and found Rex's head with his hand, scratched behind his ear slowly. Rex leaned into it and then leaned towards Sophia, pressing warmly against her side, as if he too understood the gift she had just given them. No one had ever made a wish for Jack before. Not once. Not in 50 years. He told Elena about the duplex almost before he'd decided to. It was a small unit, attached to the back of his property, nothing fancy, clean and heated and empty. He'd been meaning to rent it for a year and hadn't gotten around to it, which was mostly because getting around to things required a kind of forward momentum he hadn't always managed since coming home. "You can stay until you get back on your feet," he said. "No lease, no conditions." Alina stared at him. "Why?" she asked. Not ungratefully, genuinely. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his wallet and took out a photograph, old, worn at the edges, folded once across the middle. A young man, smiling. "My brother," he said. "He came back from his second tour in bad shape. I could see it. He stopped. Started again. I told myself he was strong enough, that he'd figure it out. I was wrong." He put the photograph away carefully. "He's gone now, and his daughter, my niece, went into the foster system before I could do anything about it." He looked at Sophia, who was feeding Rex small pieces of the sandwich crust with the absolute seriousness of someone performing an important task. "I can't fix that. But maybe." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Alina was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. Sometimes one word is the bravest thing a person can say. The apartment was simple and warm. Fresh sheets on the beds, a working heater that hummed steadily against the February cold outside. On Sophia's nightstand, Jack had placed a small lamp shaped like a star. He'd found it at the hardware store on the way home and bought it without overthinking, which was unusual for him. Sophia had touched it like it was something precious. That night, Jack slept in his recliner in the living room, the way he always did, old deployment habits that had never fully released him. Rex settled at his feet. The apartment was quiet. Outside, snow had begun to fall softly against the windows. It was 2:17 in the morning when Rex lifted his head. Jack didn't wake. He was deep in the restless, watchful sleep of veterans, present enough to sense danger, distant enough to finally rest. He didn't hear the small sound from down the hallway, didn't hear the quiet shift of a child waking in an unfamiliar place, reaching out instinctively for a sense of ground beneath her. But Rex heard it. Rex always heard it. He rose slowly from the floor, slowly because his joints were stiff now in the cold hours before dawn, because 9 years of hard service had left their marks on his body the same way they'd left their marks on Jack. He stood for a moment, steadying himself. Then he moved down the hallway, his paws quiet on the wooden floor, and nosed open Sophia's door with the gentleness of something that understood exactly how fragile the moment was. She was sitting on the floor beside her bed, knees pulled to her chest, not screaming, not calling out, just crying silently, the way children cry when they have learned that crying loudly doesn't always bring anyone. Rex crossed the room without hesitation. He lowered himself to the floor beside her, slowly, carefully, his old body settling with the quiet dignity of a soldier at rest. And then he did something that he had done before, in other dark places, for another wounded soul. He pressed his body against her, fully, warmly, his broad chest against her small back, his weight a steady, living anchor in the dark. It was something military working dogs learn, or perhaps don't learn so much as simply know, how to offer their bodies as shelter, how to say without words, without sound, "I am here, you are not alone, nothing can reach you while I am beside you." Sophia's breath caught. Then, slowly, it steadied. She turned and wrapped both arms around his neck, buried her small face in the silver and black fur, and held on the way people hold on when they have finally found something solid after too long adrift. Rex did not move. He stayed perfectly still, warm and steady and present, while her breathing slowed from ragged to calm, from frightened to somewhere approaching safe. Within minutes, she was asleep against him. Rex stayed. When Jack woke before dawn, as he always did, some internal military clock that civilian life had never fully reset, he noticed immediately that Rex was not at his feet. He sat forward in the recliner, listened. The apartment was quiet. He rose and walked down the hallway. He stopped in the doorway of Sophia's room. His retired canine, the dog who had once shielded him from the worst the world could offer, who had served 2 tours and earned his rest, lay on the floor of a little girl's room, her arms still loosely around his neck, both of them breathing slowly in the blue pre-dawn light. Rex looked up at Jack with those amber eyes. Just looked at him. Steady and calm and certain, the way he had always been. Jack stood there for a long time. He did not trust himself to move. He turned eventually, slowly, back toward the hallway and stood facing the wall for a moment, one hand pressed against the doorframe, his jaw tight, his eyes stinging in a way he hadn't let them sting in longer than he could remember. He cleared his throat quietly, so no one would hear, so no one would see. But something in him, something that had been locked and armored and protected for years, had finally, quietly, come undone. It didn't happen all at once. Real healing never does. Elena learned slowly that not every offer came with a hidden cost, that kindness could sometimes just be kindness. Jack learned slowly that he was allowed to be part of something again, that second chances didn't require you to be perfect, only present. Sophia learned what most children should never have to learn as a lesson rather than a given, what safety felt like. Rex slept outside her door every night after that, not because Jack told him to, not because of any command or training or instruction. He simply chose to. Every evening, without fail, the old dog would walk down the hallway and lower himself to the floor outside her room and stay there until morning, as if he had found, in the quiet of that apartment, the final purpose of his long and faithful life. A year later, the kitchen was full of laughter. There was flour on the counter from the cake Elena and Sophia had made together, vanilla with pink roses around the edges, because some things become traditions the moment they happen the first time. There were 8 candles on top this year. Sophia was 8 now, and she had opinions about things, about dogs and books, and what color to paint her bedroom walls. And she expressed them with a confidence that made Jack quietly, profoundly glad. Rex sat beside her chair at the table, a little grayer around the muzzle than a year ago, a little slower getting up in the mornings, but his eyes were still amber and calm and full of everything that made him Rex. Jack stood behind Sophia's chair, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Make a wish," he said. She closed her eyes. This time, she didn't wish for survival. She didn't wish for safety because she already had it. She didn't wish that the people she loved wouldn't have to go to war, because they were home, truly home, in every way that word could mean. She wished for more birthdays just like this one. When she opened her eyes and blew out the candles, the kitchen filled with the soft, warm smell of smoke and sugar and something that Jack Thompson, 51 years old, retired United States Army, finally recognized after too many years of not knowing what to call it. Purpose. Not the sharp, urgent purpose of combat, not the grinding purpose of survival. The quiet, steady, everyday purpose of a man who had shown up when it mattered. He stood there in that small kitchen with Rex leaning against his leg and Sophia laughing at the frosting on her mother's nose, and he felt something settle in his chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Not regret, not guilt, not the weight of everything he hadn't done in time. Just this, just now, just enough. Because that's the thing about second chances. They don't always announce themselves. They don't arrive with fanfare or clear instructions. Sometimes they walk through a bakery door on a quiet Thursday afternoon, wearing thin shoes and a fraying pink ribbon, and ask if there's any expired cake. And everything depends on whether you're paying attention. Rex was paying attention, and he reminded Jack to look up. Real courage isn't always the kind that earns medals. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's standing up from a corner booth when your knee hurts and your heart is closed and walking towards something that needs you. Sometimes it's pressing your body against someone who is frightened in the dark and staying there until the fear passes. Sometimes courage is just showing up. For the broken, for the forgotten, for the 7-year-old girl who doesn't cry because she has already learned that no one comes. Until someone does. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that loyalty and kindness still matter, that second chances are real, that one quiet act of grace can change the entire shape of a life, then you're exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales, because every week we come back to this place, this quiet corner where ordinary people do extraordinary things, and we remind each other what it means to truly show up. Jack and Rex will be here. We hope you will be too.